What's up everyone, this is Jono. Now, developers. They're an audience that lots of businesses want to build engagement with, and they commonly do this by putting content out there. But what kind of content do developers like to consume? Well, in this video, I'm going to walk through some concrete data from thousands of developers that were surveyed that will show you exactly what kind of content developers like to use to learn and to problem solve from, okay? I'm going to walk through the data and give you 3 really concrete things that you can do as next steps, all right? So let's first of all dig into the data. Now, it looks a little bit like this, and I want to say a big thank you to my friends at Slashdata. I've been working with them for a number of years. They interview thousands of developers every year, and they form these dashboards and reports that are super helpful in how you build relationships and build engagement with developer audiences. So be sure to go and check out the link in the video description below, where you can find out more about Slashdata. Now, this slide here you can see is types of content developers consume for learning. Now, I want to be very clear, learning, this is developing new skills to use new technologies and hardware and things like that. And what's very clear when you look at this data is that long form is king. Long form is queen, okay? So the top voted result here is long form video, recorded video. So this is going to be longer, like 10 to 20 to 30 minute long YouTube video type material. This is not going to be the shorter videos. And then you've also got long form text. So this is going to be tutorials, articles, written documentation. Now, what I find especially interesting about this is that in recent years, there's been a lot of talk about people like to consume content in small pieces, YouTube shorts and TikToks and tweets and things like that. But the data is compelling. It's telling us exactly how developers like to consume content for learning. They like longer form material with more content in there. Now, this doesn't particularly surprise me, because when I learned how to write software, I would read tutorials and articles and books and things like that, because you need to inhale a whole load of information to learn how to use a particular programming language or framework or whatever else, okay? So long form is where it's at. Now, what I also find interesting here as well, excuse me, is interactive. This is the idea that as you're learning how to develop a new skill, that you're building something as you're going along with it. And again, this doesn't particularly surprise me, because this is how human beings tend to learn, right? It's not just by inhaling information, it's actually by testing it and reviewing it and making mistakes and fixing problems, okay? So those are the key things that we see in here. The other thing I find also interesting about this data is that at the bottom is social media updates, like tweets. And, I am a little bit surprised by this, because there's just so much material out there on social media, but I think what this is telling us is that social media is a great way to socialize a piece of long form content, but people don't really actually learn from those tweets. They just see a link to something that they can click on where they can go and find out more. All right, so super interesting stuff. Let's now move over to our next slide, and this is types of content that developers consume for problem solving. Now, I do want to make a distinction here between learning and problem solving. When you're learning a new framework or a tool or a programming language or a technology, whatever. You need to inhale all that content to learn how to use it. But when you're problem solving, you've got one thing that isn't working for you, and you need to figure out how it works. Now, all developers are very familiar with this. Let's say you're using an API and it's just not returning the result that you want, for example. How do you resolve that? Well, if we take a look at the data here, what I found especially compelling here is that by far, at 52%, as opposed to the next one, which is 40%, by far the most popular method in which developers like to solve problems are forum threads, right? Now, part of the reason why I found this really interesting is that, as most of you probably know, my background here is I help companies how to build communities. I work one-on-one with companies as a consultant. I also train hundreds and hundreds of students every year through my masterclasses and group coaching and things like that. And at some point in the development of a community, you have to make a decision. Do I go with a forum or do I go with a chat channel? These are the two kind of broad buckets of community platforms. One of the reasons why I generally recommend people go with forums is because when somebody has a conversation, let's say somebody asks a question and somebody solves that question, it gets indexed on the internet, gets indexed on Google, and people can find it there as well. Whereas on chat, typically none of that is indexed on the internet, so people can't reconsume it. I think one of the reasons why we're seeing this data looking like this is not just people going to forums to ask a question to get a response, but I think this is also people finding those solutions, that they search on Google for a problem that they've got, and then it pulls up the Google search results, and one of the top hits is going to be a forum post where they can see the solution there. So this kind of redefines the importance of making sure that when you have a community and you're engaging with developers and they're solving problems, that does get indexed on the internet, okay? And that's one of the downsides of going with chat channels like Slack and Discord and things like that, unless you use other tools like Linen that you can use to resolve this issue, okay? So anyway, forum threads clearly very, very popular. We also see long form text here, articles and written documentation. I find this a little bit surprising, but again, what I'm guessing is happening here is that I think what's happening is that developers, they figure out how to solve a particular problem, and then what they do is they go and write a blog post about it. You know, when I started out in open source in the late 90s, this was kind of considered good form, is that if you figured out how to solve a tricky problem, you wrote a blog post up and you explained how you did it, so you could share it with other people. I used to write loads of blog posts like that. And I suspect that that is what the long form text response is there. And then we've got kind of short form text. I'm guessing that's gonna be Stack Exchange, things like that. And then we've got interactive, again, kind of code along. You know, nothing particularly surprising there, okay? So really interesting data, I think, clearly, that we're seeing here. Now, what I wanna do is I wanna move over to the whiteboard and actually give you some really practical next steps that you can focus on to harness this data that we've learned today, okay? So I wanna break this down into 3 pieces, okay? Now, the first piece here is to really focus, this is gonna be unsurprising, on long form content, okay? Now, what I would recommend you do, if you want to engage with developers, you want them to get to use your platform, your service, your technology, whatever it's going to be, there's 2 things I would primarily recommend you do, is that you write written tutorials, right? So what you do is you pick a cadence, which I'm going to get to in step 3 here, and you basically put out a regular written tutorial. Now, you might be thinking, well, how long does that need to be? There's this kind of misnomer out there that these kind of written tutorials need to be super long, and I actually don't believe that that's the case. What I would recommend is that you make these somewhere between 500 and 1,000 words, okay? That's, I think, gonna be plenty, okay? Sorry for the angle there. You don't have to make them 2,000, 3,000. I think a lot of people don't necessarily want to read that much, but anything over 500 words, I think we're getting into long form territory. The key thing, which I'm going to get to in just a moment, is to be really explicit in the outcome, which I'll talk about in just a second. Then the second thing is going to be YouTube videos. Okay, now YouTube is the it's the second most popular search engine on the internet, right? The first one is clearly Google. Sorry, DuckDuckGo. Sorry, Bing. Bing. Let's just be clear about something. Nobody really uses Bing. You know, the sooner Microsoft realizes this, I mean, all right, let me put this to all of you. If you use Bing, pop it into the comments. I'm gonna guess that there's not gonna be that many comments, okay? I don't think people use Bing. Anyway, moving on. So with YouTube videos, I recommend you make these somewhere between kind of 5 minutes and kind of 25 minutes, okay? Now, the way YouTube works is YouTube doesn't reward videos for being popular based upon the amount of views that they get. It's based upon watch time. So the benefit of focusing on long form content on YouTube is that you're actually going to increase the amount of minutes that people are watching your videos, and that's actually going to help you with the search rankings as well. So this is a great way to get search ranking, and also when you write these tutorials, you're probably going to be hitting lots of different keywords, and that's going to help you to rank in Google. I think that's one of the reasons why this kind of material kind of jumps up to the surface. All right. Now, the second recommendation I've got here is that you really focus on outcomes, okay? Now, what I mean by this is if you create a piece of content that's just waffly, high level, blah, 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 it's gonna suck, and people just not interested in that kind of stuff, right? The reason why, when we kind of go back to this data over here, the reason why, for example, forum threads are so popular for problem solving is because there's a specific question and there's a specific response, right? And that's the reason why it succeeds, is that we're focused on an outcome. There's a practical thing that you can take away from that forum thread as your next step, okay? So what we need to do when you're creating this kind of long form content is you need to focus on really practical outcomes. And what you wanna do is you wanna kind of do this in kind of, I guess you could say, 4 stages, right? So let's just do it like this, okay? Make it easy. The first thing is you wanna be really clear in what the goal of the piece is. So what's the goal, right? So this could be, you know, for example, this could be, I'm gonna show you how to use an API call, right? So you're gonna say, I'm gonna show you how to use this API call to get this very specific outcome. All right. Now, that's the goal that you've got with a piece, whether it's a written tutorial or a YouTube video. Now what we need to do is we need to break the information into a flow that seems natural and immediately delivers huge value to your audience, all right? And what we do is we do this in kind of 3 pieces here, all right? The first piece is that we focus on the pain, right? So if you want to get people using this API call, talk about what happens if you don't do it right? What is the pain point? So let's say you're a developer and let's say you're building an integration with Twitter, right? Just pulling this off the top of my head. So you want to build, let's say you've got an application, you want to enable people to be able to tweet from your application, right? But one of the things that developers who are using this API are struggling with is how to tweet out in a way where you can embed an image, and people are struggling to embed that image. Let's say, sake of argument, that's the issue. That's the pain point. Now what you want to do is, so the very beginning of your written tutorial or the very beginning of your video, you want to highlight what is that pain point, right? Right at the beginning of this video, if you go and rewatch it, and I'd recommend you rewatch it when you finish watching it, right at the beginning I said, one of the downsides if you can't figure out how to deliver content to developers is you throw things at the wall and things don't stick and you spend a lot more time and energy and money on it. That's the pain point. Now what you want to do is you want to talk about the agitation. So you want to agitate. You basically want to say, what happens if this pain point is not resolved? So going back to my Twitter, how do I tweet with an image kind of example? Well, this will mean that you're only tweeting out text, and text doesn't get anywhere near as much traction as images on Twitter, and that is going to mean that your tweets that you're tweeting out from your tool, your application, is not going to get as much recognition, and that's going to impact your brand, for example. So you need to agitate it. If you don't agitate the pain point, the problem you've got is that people may say, well, yeah, I understand that there's a pain point, but they don't really care about the implications. A lot of people just live in the moment. They live in the hack, and you don't want to do that. So pain, and then you agitate it. So this again is the kind of the order of the events in a written tutorial or in a YouTube video. So you define the pain point, you then agitate it. So, paragraph 1 is pain, paragraph 2 is agitation, minute 1 is in your video is pain, minute 2 is agitation. And then what happens is you provide the solution. Okay? You've set the stage with the pain and agitation, and you do the solution and you do it step by step, right? You got to make it really, really easy for people to go through. There is, again, this kind of misnomer out there that developers are these like super technical, intelligent, high IQ, superhuman people. But developers need to have things broken down into step-by-step instructions too, okay? That's just human nature. That's how you consume information, all right? And then the third piece here, which I'm going to put down here, is to create a cadence. And what I mean by this is that you say, how many of these things do I want to do every week? How many of these things do I want to do every 2 weeks? How often do I put this material out there, okay? As a general rule, I would recommend you have one of these 2 every week, right? So what you do is you do once a week. So you say every week I'm going to put out either a new tutorial or I'm going to put out a brand new video. And when you do that, that means that you're putting more material out there that people can find on Google and YouTube and whatever else, but also you're constantly solving pain points. You're constantly providing solutions, and this is really going to help developers to make the most out of your technology, to make the most out of your application, whatever it might be, okay? Anyway, I hope that was useful. Be sure to let me know in the comments or drop me email, jono@jonobacon.com. I'd love to hear from people what they think of the work that I'm doing. And I'd love to hear your experiences with how you've been engaging with developers in the comments. So peace out. See you in the next one.